What's going on? Jimmy Consenza here in Chicago. Hope everybody's doing well. I got a very interesting story I'm going to drop tonight. We're going to talk about a legend, and I mean a legend, in the Chicago Police Department. This gentleman here, Mr. Bill Hanhart. Bill Hanhart became the highest ranking Chicago cop in the history of the Chicago Police Department. He was chief of detectives in the third largest city in the country, second to New York, Los Angeles. And back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, the streets of Chicago and some of the neighborhoods on the south side and the west side were literally war zones. That was one of the most dangerous times ever to become a Chicago police officer. So we're going to talk about this legend. But before we do, I've got to get a few things off my chest. You know, at times I will watch Scott Bernstein's channel. I would follow him, and I enjoy most of his videos. But in his recent video, I have to call him out on a few things. Number one, he was wrong about Joey Merlino. For any of you that follow the Little Stuff and Skinny, you could see exactly what Joey Merlino and Little Stuff are doing. They had a stellar opening day. They're going to open up Skinny Joey's cheesesteaks all over the country. The man's days as a Philadelphia gangster are long behind him. He's lost his family, his friends. He donates thousands of dollars to the poor, gives back to the community. And there's Scott Bernstein ripping on this guy. He also is wrong about the little guy. I mean, I should have called him on this a year ago. The little guy he's referring to is blind as a bat, has serious health issues, is no longer involved in the Chicago outfit. His outfit days are long gone. Retired in Florida, has absolutely nothing to do with the Chicago mob. Same with Sally D. Scott Bernstein is saying Sal De Laurentiis. Wait, I wrote it down. What do you say? He's one of the biggest dons in America. Dons of what? Sally D is close to 90. His gangster days are long gone. This man is retired, trying to relax with his grandchildren, probably his great-grandchildren. Scott Bernstein is saying that the Chicago outfit is alive and well, that it's active, and get this, that it's actually growing. What year is this guy living in? What could possibly be left of the Chicago outfit? The story's over. And like my dad used to tell me, don't feel sorry for these guys, Jimmy. They had a hell of a run. But it's long gone. So now let's get into it. I just had to get that off my chest. Scott Bernstein is a good reporter. He's a pretty good journalist. He's probably attended a couple trials himself. But by no means is this guy 1,000% accurate on some of his stories. Another example, he claims Gigi. Gigi hasn't been in trouble in over 25 years. I mean, going back when he was a kid. He's claiming that Gigi's traveling all over the country taking care of outfit business. I mean, that's a complete joke. Maybe Scott Bernstein needs to get out of his little room, put down the computer, and see the world and travel. Just because Gigi's traveling to Miami and New York and all my favorite places doesn't mean he's taking care of any business, taking photos with old wise guys. I mean, give me a break. But we're going to get into it just the other day, Friday. I gave my guy Richie a tour of the Grand Avenue neighborhood. Then we drove to Taylor Street and we ended up in Bridgeport. Richie grew up in Taylor Street, not at the heart of the patch, more on the west side. And one of our first stops, we stopped at Diamato's Bakery. Hands down, no bullshit, the best bakery in the city of Chicago. Definitely check it out. And then right across the street, you got one of the oldest social clubs in the city of Chicago. This was Joe Lombardo, Mikey Frex, Mike Switek, Dominic Calarco. This is where a lot of the Grand Avenue guys used to hang out. Sadly, the club is closed, but the building is still there. Now, as most of us know, police departments in our country, the corruption has ran rapid for years. Los Angeles, Chicago, Detroit, Philadelphia, Boston, New York. Corruption from the top down for decades. And in my opinion, I think the Chicago Police Department, along with the Cook County in the state of Illinois, is one of the most corrupt in the country. I mean, we're third largest city, second behind Los Angeles and New York City. Years ago, somebody said, who's the biggest gang in Chicago? Hands down, Chicago police. Years ago, if you got pulled over for a broken taillight, next minute you know you're in an interrogation room confessing to a murder. Vast majority of Chicago police always had their hand out for free food, free tickets, or a subtle bribe. Chicago outfit had a lot of made members, not a lot, but a handful of made members of the Chicago mob that were actual Chicago police officers. That lowlife Lenny Patrick testified against Gus Alex. He said he had 4 high-ranking Chicago detectives that worked for him. You can imagine the favors that a lot of these cops, detectives, Cook County sheriffs do for some of these wise guys. Now, here you got Louis Eppolito and Carpacaro, the 2 mob cops in New York. These guys were affiliated with the Lucchese family, reporting right up to that maniac gas pipe. Not only were these guys committing scores, breaking the law, but they were actually murdering guys. They were given contracts, getting paid cash to kill certain people on gas pipes orders. Chicago police, no different. I personally knew a couple mob cops. Some of them have passed away and they're on the other side, and some of them are retired. I would never once mention their name. The Chicago outfit had a lot of influence in the Chicago Police Department and the Cook County Sheriff's Department. Now here's Bill Hanhart, right? Somebody really needs to do a movie, write a book, a novel, maybe an HBO series, a documentary. This man's life, just his life as a Chicago police officer. I mean, he was a cop over 30 years. Chief of detectives. I think he had the third highest position in the Chicago Police Department. This guy was a man's man, a cop's cop. He solved more unsolved crimes, locked more people up, had more collars than any Chicago Police Department, any Chicago policeman in the police department. Now, we all remember Jane Byrne, right? Late 70s, 1979, I think. She was the only female ever to become mayor of Chicago. Again, third largest city in the country. And one of the very first things she did, she appointed Bill Hanhart as the chief of police or chief of detectives. And by doing that, that was a great day for the Chicago outfit because they had their man, their guy, Bill Hanhart, as the top brass the Chicago Police Department. As we all know, the vast majority of wise guys and associates weren't too concerned about the police or the Cook County sheriffs. They're more concerned with the feds. As I mentioned, this man was a hero. Numerous car chases. One time he was confronted by some gangbangers. They had a machine gun. There was a shootout. Bill Hanhart ended up killing 2 of them, 2 out of the 3. He saved the life of several officers. Anytime a Chicago cop was killed, he was always the first to lead the charge into capturing the guy. If we had more men, more cops like Bill Hanhart, now our streets, our neighborhoods, our cities would be in much better shape. But Bill Hanhart was like the Michael Jordan of detectives. Great photo here. I mean, these stories go back to the 60s, the 70s. He saved numerous people's lives. He promoted hundreds of people in the Chicago Police Department. Very powerful, very well-liked man, very well respected. And in that position, obviously, was pretty close with a lot of Chicago outfit bosses, made members of the Chicago mob, and associates. And one of those was this legend himself, Jerry Scalise. He's a member of the old Wild Bunch crew right there on Taylor Street, one of my favorite neighborhoods. And Hanhart was one of the first people to arrest burglar thief Jerry Scalise. This guy's a master thief, one of the best thieves in the country. I will never, ever forget when I seen him at the Dirksen Federal Building. It was him, Arthur the Genius, and Bobby Puglia. They were casing, they were planning on robbing armored cars and a couple banks. They actually had a hit list. One of the people on the hit list, they were considering robbing Angela Petria's fortress right there in Bridgeport, allegedly. Also, Scalise was the prime suspect, or was actually convicted in the famous Marlboro diamond heist. And I just seen a video of him on the Skinny, on their podcast on Patreon, and this man did not get a fair trial. Nobody ever really asked him if he actually stole the famous diamond. And the laws in the UK are a lot different than the laws in the United States. Same with the jails, different people, different culture. And there, if you give the government, if you allow the jury or the judge to know your criminal background, then you can't dispute the cops or the government's evidence. Where if you submit your background, then you could attack the evidence at the trial. Scalise and his lawyer did not know that. So they didn't allow his record in court, but he couldn't dispute the government's witnesses. And one of the witnesses that testified that he saw Scalise and allegedly Arthur the Genius in the disguise. He wrote down the plate on the car. Scalise's team did their own investigation, and they were able to prove that the witness fucking lied. So that man lied, and that was a big piece of evidence that helped convict him. But anyways, this is a stand-up man. This guy did football years in prison, never ratted, never rolled. I remember hearing the story of Frankie Calabrese, Ronnie Jarrett, and the crew, the Wild Bunch crew, when they killed the Dauber brother, the Daubers, Billy Dauber and his wife. But this man's a legend. He's in his 80s now. God bless you. I hope you're doing well, Mr. Scalise. Another legend, you got Gabit, this gentleman in his 80s. You got the feds are still watching him. Now, why would you spend countless hours and thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars following around a man in his 80s? with everything else going on in the world. But I bring up Gabit because one time Bill Hanhart, super cop, right? Pretty big guy. Bill Hanhart was the type of guy where when he walked into that room, you felt his energy, right? He had a reputation. And even though he was associated with Chicago outfit, he wouldn't hesitate to lock some of these guys up. And one time, Bill Hanhart threatened Bobby Bellavia that he was going to fucking kill him. And Gabit looked right back at him, stared him in the eyes, and said, "The gun shoots both ways." Now, that's my favorite quote. Out of all the wise guys gangster quotes, that's my favorite. And I think Mr. Hanhart might have underestimated Gabit, not realizing he was with Rocky and Felice crew. But I love it. Bobby Bellavia, a legend in the Chicago outfit. His case should have been appealed as well, mostly because of that lowlight B.J. Jehoda. Lied on the stand, committed perjury and got away with it. Embellished, exaggerated his relationship with some of the defendants and actually wore a wire against them. If it wasn't for that lowlight blowjob Jehoda's testimony, Bobby Gabit, Sally De Laurentiis, Rocky, and my guy, the late Bobby Salerno, would have been found not guilty or maybe a hung jury. But that's a great saying. He looked right back at Bill Hanhart, chief of detectives, number one man in Chicago Police Department, and told him the gun shoots both ways. Nothing ever happened to Gabit. Now here, we all know Tony Spelatro, right? The little guy. Tony Spelatro was on trial every other month. Every other 6 months, he had a case, and he beat most of them, kind of like John Gotti. But he had a great lawyer, Oscar Goodman, who to me is the best of the best. And at one of his trials, I think it was at the Cook County Court Building at 26 in California, Bill Hanhart, chief of detectives of the Chicago Police Department, testified as a character witness, I believe, for Tony Spelatro, basically saying that what a swell guy he was, and the fact that Frankie Collada, the government's star witness, was a liar and that you really couldn't believe him. But Bill Hanhart took a lot of heat, being the top Chicago cop that testified against a mobster's at a mobster's trial. Sometimes I think Tony Spelatro would have been better off getting convicted in one of his trials. He probably would have served some time in prison and could be alive today as one of the bosses. But that's not what happened. We all know what happened. He fucked everything up in Las Vegas. Not just him, but his crew. Originally, they were going to kill him in Vegas with an Uzi and a grenade and a hit team. They couldn't really get a good tail on him, so they switched to Plan B. Plan B, as we all know what happened, they lured the two brothers to their house in Bensonville. As Michael Spelatro walked down the stairs, according to Nick Calabrese, Tony and Michael Spelatro were brutally beaten and stomped to death by all the heavyweights. They all had on gloves, and then a separate crew took those bodies and buried them in Northwest Indiana. Those bodies weren't supposed to ever be found. But I will never, ever forget hearing the Nick Calabrese testify in court in great detail on how the Spelatro brothers were killed. You could hear a fucking pin drop in that courtroom. Some people don't believe Nick Calabrese. They think he put a lot of those higher-ups in there, men like No Nose DeFranzo, Rocky, Carlisi, Ferriola. They feel Nick Calabrese just put him up there to make his story bigger. But I don't know, bro. I was in court. I found Nick credible for the most part. Not everything, but for the most part. He kind of flipped and flopped a little bit with Jimmy Marcello's testimony, but I believe the heavyweights were there because they wanted to personally get their hands on him. That's how pissed off they were. That's just my opinion. What do you guys think? Do you believe Nick Calabrese? Now we'll keep going. Joey Lombardo took the stand in his own defense, right? That was unheard of for a mob boss to take this stand. Well, he did. He probably figured, fuck it, at my age, what do I got to lose? And his alibi, when they asked him, Where were you in 1974 when they killed Danny Seifert? Joey said that he was at a diner having breakfast. When he went to pay for his tab, he went to the car. Somebody broke into his glove compartment and stole his wallet. He went back into the restaurant and he told them, 2 Chicago cops told him, go make out a report at the police station. So Joey Lombardo, his alibi when Danny Seifert was shot and killed in front of his wife and son, Joey was at Bill Hanhart's Bill Hanhart's police station, right there on Wood Street in the neighborhood, right between Grand and Chicago Avenue. So that's where Joe Lombardo was. You know, a lot of the media call him Joey the Clown. Chicago Sun-Times reporter Art Patak used to call him the Clown. And he was a clown. He was a funny bastard. Actually seeing him make some cracks during the trial and during the break of the Family Secrets trial. But people that knew him in the neighborhood called him Lumpy or Joe. But Joe was very close friends and associates with Bill Hanhart, with the rest of the Grand Avenue crew. Because as I said before, most of the Grand Avenue guys and some of the Taylor Street guys, these are some of the best burglars, thieves in the country. And that's what Hanhart was all about. Now, we'll talk about, I think it was early 1970s, the famous mob hit of Teamsters official Alan Dorfman. He was coming from lunch, walking in the lobby with his buddy, Irv Weiner, and he was shot and killed right there in the parking lot of the famous Purple Hilton Hotel. And when the detectives checked his pockets, he had a little black book. And in that little black book was Bill Hanhart's name. So that got their attention. And that was the very early stages of when the feds started taking a closer look at the chief of detectives, Bill Hanhart. Bill Hanhart was very, very close with Pat Marcy, Alderman Fred Rohde, and the entire First Ward. So imagine that. You have, through the First Ward, you've got control of most of your judges, state officials, all the aldermen, and then you got the mob cop, number one guy, Bill Hanhart, that controlled the entire Chicago Police Department, and that stretched out to the Cook County Sheriffs. So basically, Chicago outfit controlled everything back then, from permits, liquor licenses, construction jobs, sweetheart contracts, no-show jobs. If your son fucked up and committed a murder, you bribed the judge $10,000, you could beat a murder. That's right. For $10,000 through the First Ward, you could beat a murder rap if you had connections. So that's how powerful the First Ward was. And that lowlife, corrupt lawyer, cokehead, degenerate gambler, Bob Cooley, he was the bagman. He was the one that would bribe the judges and work with the guys in the First Ward. He said on the stand, I'll never forget it, he said that Bill Hanhart is the third most dangerous man in Chicago. Now think about that. That says a lot. You had number one, the outfit boss, whoever that was at the time. Number two, Pat Marcy. And number three, Bill Hanhart. Now here's a guy, James D. Lenardi. I believe he is a Chicago sergeant, top brass in Chicago outfit, non-corruptible guy, an honest man, one of the few. I remember seeing him at several federal trials at the Dirksen Federal Building. He was always dressed in a nice suit. He had a nice tan. You could tell he was a man of importance. I think he was retired at that time, because a lot of times they have a lot of federal agents that hang around the Dirksen Federal Building. But when he found out that Bill Hanhart had ties to the First Ward in organized crime, he demoted him. Now, as I said in previous videos, in the Taylor Street neighborhood, the old Wild Bunch crew, 42 gang, and the Grand Avenue crew. You got some of the best burglars, thieves in the city, in the state, in the Midwest, if not the country. Some of these guys are masters at peeling safes. They could pick any lock. Lots of experience. They were, schooled by some of the best thieves. Just passed on and on. And Hanhart's crew was a little unique. He put together an elite, a VIP crew, a VIP team of some of the best burglars in the business. And what they started doing, they were casing and eventually robbing traveling jewelry salesmen. Now I'm a traveling salesman. I don't sell jewels, but I know that lifestyle. Airplanes, all the driving, hotels, breakfast, lunch, dinner, meetings. That gets old. And Hanhart's crew had all kinds of very unique and creative ways in how to rob these jewelry salesmen. They were even casing and robbing some of the trade shows where you had, some of the best jewelers from all over the world that had some of their precious gems and diamonds and Rolexes and watches and rings and all that bullshit on display. Bill Hanhart and his crew would put together a plan and rob him. He was charged with overseeing a multi-million-dollar sophisticated burglary crew, not only in the Chicago suburbs, Midwest, but these guys are doing scores all over the country. And his right-hand man right here is Joe Basinski, Polish guy. This was Bill Hanhart's right-hand man. He was one of the defendants, one of the guys that got pinched. He was second in command. They charged him and the crew with racketeering and interstate transportation of stolen property. So this guy would do the homework and do the research and find out who are the biggest jewelry salesmen, when are the biggest shows, who's exhibiting, who's going to be there, what gems, what diamonds, what's the potential to score. He was kind of like Hanhart's not only number two, but like master of the crew, leader of the crew, just under Bill Hanhart. Then you had another member of the crew, guy from the Grand Avenue neighborhood, Jimmy Dattiano, Jimmy Legs. This guy was one of the best wheelmen, one of the best drivers, getaway guys in the Chicago outfit. Just like reminds me of John Feccarata, another great wheelman. But I've never met this man, but I have had drinks with some of his family members. I've heard some of the personal legendary stories of this man. This man here was a master thief. Again, Bill Hanhart just didn't grab a bunch of Mamalukes and form a gang. These guys were all hand-picked. Each one had their own specialty. Another member of Hanhart's crew, you had DeStefano's nephew. This guy here, another thief, burglar. Another member of the crew, Paul Peanuts Pansco. Again, these guys are all top burglars, some of the best thieves, all your major scores. These guys were the prime suspects. And a lot of them came very close to getting brutally tortured and clipped when John Mendel and another guy broke into Tony Accardo's house. The outfit bosses were rounding up all the burglars and brutally killing them all. Now here, speaking of Here's a hitman from Chicago outfit who's actually a sleeper. The very guy from Chicago, real close with Joe Lombardo, Tony Spelatro. He eventually heads out west and becomes a sleeper. He was the actual lookout when Nick Calabrese and Joey Hansen killed Emo Vacci. Emo Vacci was killed out west because Joey Lombardo thought he was going to talk to the feds. But they call him the Indian because he looks just like an Indian. When I seen him, he was in his late 70s. He slept most of the day. He looked harmless. They really didn't have a whole lot of evidence against him, but he was hurt. He was heard on tape telling somebody that Nicky Calabrese could put him away for the rest of his life. So he knew by Nicky flipping, he was going down, and that's exactly what happened. But I remember seeing the Indian and Joe Lombardo whisper to one another not every time, but several times the jury stepped out of the courtroom. And I always wondered what those two were talking about. But I bring up Paulie Shiro, the Indian, is because he was in charge of the work cars, the transmitters, the walkie-talkies, all the tools, all the gadgets, the tear gas, the explosives, anything they needed to pull off their score. He was like the mechanics man, right? I bring him up because he was a very important part of Hanhart crew and a very close associate of Chicago outfit. Here's a little news clipping. Another guy in Hanhart's crew was Chicago mob cop Fred Pacenti. And I've never met Freddie, but I read his book. I enjoy all his videos. I love his stories. Some people say that he embellishes. Some people think he's a rat. But he obviously was real close with Joe Lombardo, Tony Spelatro, and all the rest of the Grand Avenue guys. Another career burglar thief, close with Bill Hanhart, but I think towards the end, Bill Hanhart lost trust in Fred Pacenti. But God bless Freddie Pacenti. What a character. And then we all know this movie here, one of my favorites, The Thief, right? With James Caan. Bill Hanhart was like a consultant for this movie. There's another Chicago outfit burglar that I think James Caan portrays in the movie The Thief. I'm not going to say his name because he's still alive today. But this is a great movie of a professional thief that wants to break away from the Chicago mob. And it's filmed in Chicago. You guys definitely got to check it out. And Bill Hanhart definitely had a hand in that. Now the prosecutor, right, that prosecuted Bill Hanhart, fast forward, Bill Hanhart pled guilty. And John Scully was the prosecutor. Now, I seen this man, along with Mitch Mars and Marcus Funk, put away all the mob guys. A lot of the outfit guys despise him and Mitch Mars, but this man is one of the best prosecutors in the country. I remember during a break, it was on the weekend. I was at Dunkin' Donuts right there in Jackson and State. It was on a Saturday, and I actually seen the prosecutor there, and he recognized me from seeing me in court. And first thing he said to me is, "You're not one of those guys, are you?" And I said, "No." And I said, "What are you doing here?" And he went on to say that it's just countless of hours of work on big cases like that. But it was funny that he said that to me. But John Scully is one of the best prosecutors, and he's the one that helped convict Bill Hanhart and his crew. And here's his fine attorney, I think it's Thomas Sullivan. I've seen this gentleman several times in the courtroom, one of the best classic defense attorneys in Chicago. He represented Bill Hanhart, along with others. Hanhart had a dream of attorneys. And I remember seeing him at other mob trials, too. I think he represented Carlisi. Now, rather than blow trial, Hanhart pled guilty. I think he was given a 11-year sentence. He had a lot of health issues. And it was real hard on this man. I mean, this man had a huge family. I think he had like 18 grandchildren. A legend in the city of Chicago. You would think that a federal judge and the prosecutor, given his tremendous career as a Chicago police detective for over 30 years, I mean, that's literally surviving multiple wars, you thought they would give Hanhart somewhat of a break, because I believe he was remorseful. Now, on a positive note, even though Hanhart got convicted, he was able to keep his $70,000 a year salary. So thank God for that, right? That's the least the city can do compared to everything this man's done. Sadly, Bill Hanhart was sentenced to 12 years, not 11 years, 12 years in prison. Bill Hanhart was released from prison, from federal prison, in 2011. Finally, he was able to come home with 7 children, 18 grandchildren, and 19 great-grandchildren. This man was larger than life. He had a lot of health issues. I mean, he became a cop back in 1953. They'll never, ever see another detective, another chief, another cop like this. He was an invaluable source for a lot of the top reporters in Chicago, tipping off FBI agents and giving them key details about crime. Not ratting out anybody, but just helping, providing, giving key information that solved a lot of crimes. Hanhart retired from the police force in 1986. But even though he retired, he wielded a significant influence. And some say he actually started out the burglary crew while he was on the police force. But I'm not so sure if that's true. So we're going to do a little recap here, if you guys don't mind. I'll make it quick. Again, the corruption. Don't take my word for it. Look at your history. The corruption in our cities, our suburbs, even our small little hick towns has ran rapid from the top all the way down. Now, most cops, as we all know, are good cops. They're freaking heroes, for Christ's sake. I have total respect for police officers and detectives. Let's get that clear. But generally speaking, overall, the corruption, I mean, it's gotten out of hand. Chicago outfit, we had our own mob cops, made members of Chicago outfit, guys that did heavy work were Chicago police officers. Bill Hanhart, right? Let's talk about him real quick. A legend. Grew up in the on the north side, northwest side, right there in Edison Park. This man was a Chicago police officer for 33 years, the highest ranking former Chicago police officer ever to be convicted of a crime. A man's man. He was a cop's cop. He had your back. He was running into the building first. Hundreds of shootouts, car chases, foot chases. I mean, this guy had balls. A lot of veteran Chicago cops now, they're not running, they're not chasing anybody. He eventually retired from the Chicago police force in 1986. And allegedly ran a very sophisticated, multi-million-dollar burglary crew, right? Not only in Chicago, but the suburbs, the Midwest, and other parts of the country. Prosecutor John Scully said it was his greed that destroyed his career. Multi-millions of dollars. And again, Jane Byrne, if it wasn't for her, who knows? But she did the right thing. She appointed the Chicago mob's man, Bill Hanhart, in the top position. That was huge for the Chicago outfit to be able to control the First Ward and the Chicago Police Department. Superman, I mean, you guys could do the research. There's so many stories This guy was like a Kojak, like a Beretta, a Wild Harry, a John Wayne. I mean, they don't make cops like this anymore. Solved some of the most difficult cases in the Chicago Police Department history. Several Chicago outfit bosses, mob guys would give Hanhart thousands of dollars a month in bribes. And one mob guy, I'm not going to say his name, used to give Hanhart a brand new car every 2 years. You got Scalise. You guys got to check out the interview with this man. I can't say enough about him. You got Gabit, same thing. Two living legends. These men are in their 80s. Their days in the Chicago outfit are long gone. Tony Spelatro, right after Hanhart retired, Hanhart testified at the Tony Spelatro trial where he beat that case. Joey Lombardo's alibi. He just happened to be at Hanhart's police station on Wood, right there in the neighborhood, when Danny Seifert was killed. When Dorfman got clipped, they found a little black book. It had Bill Hanhart, chief of detectives, name in that book. That's when the feds first started looking into Hanhart. That was the early stages, the early days of the investigation. It was very, very close with the powerful First Ward. So again, let me emphasize this again. Chicago outfit had all the judges, aldermen, politicians, local businessmen, and the Chicago Police Department. They control everything. The outfit, the First Ward, and the Chicago Police Department. Now, not like this guy. He'd lock them all up if he could. And I think that's one of the reasons I used to see him at the Dirksen Federal Building quite a bit, is he took great pleasure finally seeing all these guys that he used to go after get locked up and get convicted. But this is, I think he was a Chicago police sergeant at the time. He actually demoted Bill Hanhart when he realized who Bill Hanhart was affiliated with. All the tools, right? Sophisticated burglary crew were robbing drug dealers, not drug dealers, jewelry salesmen. Now here you got Joe Skinny Basinski, second in command, right? He had to be very well trusted by Hanhart. Hanhart's crew, like I said, was handpicked. He got indicted on racketeering and interstate transportation of stolen goods. What he would do, he would identify the targets. He would pick out which salesman, which jewelry salesman to rob, right? Which trade shows to rob, store owners, salesmen. That was his job. Then you had the muscle man, right? You got to have a muscle man, was the nephew of Mad Sam DeStefano. This maniac here, right? He was the muscle of the crew, 46 years old. Him along with Guy Altobello, what they would do, they would tip off the crew on the jewelry salesman's whereabouts, his pattern. Stalk him, track him, tail him for months. Then you had Peanuts, right? Pauly Shiro, the Indian. He would surveil the jewelry stores, surveil the trade shows. Again, more and more research. He stalked them across the country. He would analyze their travel patterns. He would make duplicate keys of their car. He would enlist private information from police databases. Courtesy, of Hanhart's buddies on the police department. I mean, imagine that. These guys had access to the jewelry owners, the salesmen, the employees, all their information. Another thief, professional burglar, Chicago mob cop. As I mentioned before, Chicago outfit had a lot of mob cops, if you will. The great movie The Thief, you got James Scully, prosecutor, mob attorney, Mr. Sullivan. Hanhart, though, he really suffered. I know a friend of mine knew Bill Hanhart well, and he had a lot of serious illnesses. And there's nothing worse than being locked up in prison when you need serious medical help. But God bless Bill Hanhart. Definitely do some research on him. There's so much more you can learn about him. Just his police career alone, right? Again, 33 years he was on the force. The highest ranking Chicago police officer ever to get convicted. But the greed got to him, running a multi-million-dollar sophisticated burglary crew. Does 12 years in prison, gets out, is able to spend quality time with his 7 children. I think he had like 18 grandchildren, 8 great-grandchildren. I mean, a big, big family. Thank God for that. But now look at our cities, right? Without cops and leadership like Bill Hanhart, I mean, I know people that do not come downtown anymore because of the violence, all the looting. They're afraid to get carjacked, afraid they're going to get shot. Trust me, with Bill Hanhart as chief of police, this would not be allowed. And that's what we miss. But God bless Bill Hanhart. I never met him. I did not get a chance to go to his trial because he pled guilty. But that would have been one hell of a trial. If you guys like my Chicago mob trial stories, hit the like button, subscribe, share with my friends. Everybody have a great week. Ciao.